Senpai, and happy holiday from Kohai's collection. I'm Kohai, and welcome back to number 16 in our AFA series. Today we're going to take a look at the Super Sonico 10th Merry Christmas Edition by Mimeyoi. She's a 1/7 scale with an MSRP of 23,650 yen. And this will lead us up to our very next in-depth review on the Yoshitoku Sonico in just a few days. So if you're a Sonico fan, keep an eye out for that. Although we'll go more in depth in our Yoshitoku review, to give you guys a brief backstory, Sonico is depicted as a very ditzy and naive 18-year-old college student studying marine biology. On top of that, she is also a gravure model, likes to help out at her grandmother's restaurant, and is also the lead guitarist and singer for her band First Astronomical Velocity. But in reality, she is the game company Nitro Plus's mascot and debuted at the music festival Nitro Supersonico in 2006. Going back to the figure, this figure has two different versions, the TF version and the non-TF version, with the complete edition having both a cape and an alternate head with a Santa hat. If you end up liking this figure, she is still available on AmiAmi at a discount, with the TF version having an MSRP of 13,860 yen, and for basically $4 more, you can get the complete edition with both a cape and alternate head. Every year, we try to do a holiday video if possible, and funny enough, she was actually supposed to be last year's holiday video because originally she was supposed to release in December of 2024, but she just barely missed that cutoff, releasing on December 26, 2024, and of course not arriving until January, so we did have to postpone her until this year, and unfortunately we weren't able to do a holiday video last year, so she is a bit dated at this point, but still just as cute. Moving on to the box, where we do have the dimensions in the corner if you're interested. Overall, they went for a very minimalist, classy look. We have some glossy snowflake decals, a lot of gold detailing with stars and dots. On the front, we actually have a very large open window, so you can take a good look at the figure before purchasing. And then on the back, we have the Mimeyoi logo, we have the name of the figure, and a Christmas tree. I do think it's very cute that the 0 in 10th is a heart, and overall, this box just reminds me of a classic Christmas ornament. And here's the figure with the dimensions also in the corner. Initial impressions are a few things I find quite cute about this figure, such as the tiny reindeer headphones and the small little snowman sleigh shoes. On the figure in general, there is a decent amount of shading, but there is a severe lack of shading on one of the largest elements, which is going to be her cape. For paint, I'll go ahead and start with his head and then move to the alternate. For the Santa hat, we can see that there is no shading around the white fluffy rim here. For the rest of the Santa hat, it is red, and although it is hard to see on camera, there is a white highlight here and here. Moving back to the front, we can see that her hair is a matte pink. We have a white highlight up at the top, and then they use that translucent technique here to fade to a very light blue that I don't think is very effective on the front of her hair. From here, we can see the cute little reindeer faces that are mostly clean. He must be Rudolph since he has a bright red nose, but I do wish they would have made the antlers a slightly different color, as this would have been more realistic. Moving to the back, while sadly we do not have a little reindeer butthole, I do think the highlights are much more effective. Now that we've removed her hat, we can see that there's a white highlight at the top of her head, and we once again have very light blue highlights. We can definitely tell that there is translucent plastic, and once again, I don't think it's super effective. From the side, we can see the rest of the little chubby reindeer body that has no additional shading. The headphones in general are clean, with a shiny silver for all of the metallic pieces, and a black for the screw and ear pad. Moving back to the front, the reindeer are just as cute. Everything looks very similar to the alternate head. For the face, the eye decals are set nicely. They are glossy. We do have a little bit of blush, and for the lips, we have a dark line separating them and a glossy pink paint for the lips. Now that Sonico has been decapitated, we could take a closer look at the cape, which is one of my biggest gripes. Since it's such a large piece of plastic, you really need some shading to help it pop instead of looking blobby, but there is absolutely no shading on this whatsoever. The white areas at least give us some illusion of shading, but it's really just due to the modeling, as the white paint lays thicker on some of the raised areas and thinner in the divots, giving us at least some sense of depth. But there is no shading on the green area, and then the bells and stars are just a shiny gold color. Then moving to the front, trying not to get distracted by this very cultured view, we can see that we have two gold buttons. Then when we remove the cape, we can see that she has a fluffy collar that goes around her neck with a single gold button. Moving on to one of the more cultured shots of this figure, the ribbon is a very pretty sparkly pink, and they have added some nice fades to it. We start with a very dark pink and then fade into a light pink, almost white, in many different areas, but the two white lines on the edge of the ribbon are not very clean. For the skin, it is difficult to tell whether they added shading or it's just the modeling, but we do have these darker areas around her belly button and where the ribbons cut into her skin, giving us some more depth. We can see that the areolas are painted a glossy pink, but one of the things that I dislike the most about this figure is that they also added these glossy areas randomly to different parts of her body in order to make her look sweaty, but honestly, I don't really think that they successfully achieved this. It looks kind of odd and honestly just ruins the texture of her skin. The fingernails are painted a light glossy pink. From here, we can see that the bow on the back of her left arm does have a nice amount of shading, and we can also see the ribbons that go into her thigh. Moving to an extra culture view, for the bell on the string, we have a metallic green for the leaves, a metallic red for the bow with printed white lines as they are clean and don't quite go all the way to the bell, and then for the bell we have a metallic gold. From here, we can see her red and white socks, which are mostly clean. The shoes are a glossy red, with the strap also being glossy, and there are white highlights down the side and front. The bottom of her shoes are supposed to be a sleigh, and so we have a brown part here, and then the rods are gold, and surprisingly, the little snowman is very clean. But sadly, on my Sonico, they did miss the glossy finish on the strap of her right shoe. Flipping her over, we can see what the back of her ribbons looks like. And finally, for the present that sits on top of the base color is this light green with a dark green shading around all of the edges of the box. The ribbon is this really pretty shimmery gold paint, and even though it is hard to see on camera, they have added a darker gold where the ribbon wraps around the edges of the box and where it meets the bow. So overall, while I do think there's an above average amount of shading, and I do really like all of the paint finishes they used, funny enough, one of the largest pieces of plastic on this figure is severely lacking in shading, and then some of the line work is just not clean. So overall, I will say that it's an average 3 out of 5. Moving on to modeling, we can see that the hat has very minimal detailing with a few wrinkles, and I do wish that the white parts had actual fuzzy material like my outfit, as they're not very convincing. On the front, the reindeer are still very cute and appropriately chubby, but the detailing on the bangs is very minimal and there is flashing around the ends and on these strands of hair as well. And then we can also see this egregious piece of hair added back in. On the back, we have more details in the strands of her hair, but we still have more flashing. And it's pretty much the same on the alternate head, with less detailing as we get to the top of her head. From here, we can see the headphones a little bit better, and I do think that there's an adequate amount of detailing. For the ear pad, they've actually added some bumps and wrinkles to make it look more realistic and like faux leather. The front pretty much looks identical to the alternate head, except this time we have not only one, but two pieces of egregious hair added back in. And moving to the face, which is another one of my gripes about this figure, as I do think that they've made her cheeks a little bit too full up top, but the real issue is the mouth, as the lips aren't really modeled, and so it does look very odd. Moving to the cape, once again, they should have used a fuzzy material on at least the white areas to make it look more realistic. As of right now, it's not really selling me on it. And while the start is adequate, the bells definitely have very minimal detailing as they aren't even modeled in on the inside, and then we can definitely tell where some of these have pegs where they're going into the cape as we're losing that perfectly round bell shape. We're back to our cultured shot, and there is a lot to talk about here. For the ribbon, I do think that it looks realistic, and they did a pretty good job of making it all look like one piece, except for the seam on the side, which is, to be fair, very hard to see. With the way the ribbon works, it does look like it could almost be cast off, and so this is a bit of a missed opportunity, as many of Sonico's figures are more not safe for work. As for the body sculpt, overall, I do feel that it's pretty average. We do have some of the leg muscles sculpted in. Her stomach is curvier. She has a little belly button modeled in. Her nipples are modeled slightly, but what I do have an issue with here is her breasts. The problem is they have it straight from the artwork and then do not know how physics works. One, they made her breasts too large. Two, the right breast at least looks somewhat realistic with the amount of tension she's applying to the ribbon. But then the left breast, her titty is literally being crushed by the force of this ribbon, and yet somehow it has enough slack to follow the contour of her body, so it just doesn't make sense. Again, I'll get more into this when I get to artistry, but for reference, this is how the artist drew her titties, and I know I wasn't the best at physics, but somehow the math ain't mathin'. Then from here, we can see the seam between her right breast and the ribbon, her stomach and the ribbon, and then I'm not quite convinced that her fingers are holding the ribbon as they seem to be hovering ever so slightly. Speaking of the fingers, they really struggle to separate these and the tips are all kinds of wonky. And these are just horrifying. Moving down, the bell accessory does have an adequate amount of detailing, and the ribbons are just covering the goods. For the socks, I once again wish we had that fuzzy element, but the shoes do have an adequate amount of detailing, and the snowman is once again very cute. And on the back, we can see some muscle detailing, the roundness of her butt, the ribbon going between her legs, which in real life would be very uncomfortable, the pudge of her thighs, and just like all the other bows, the ribbons on this one are not modeled in very well, and there is not very good separation between her arms and sides. The present is made out of PVC instead of cardboard material, making it feel very stiff. The modeling is very minimal. We can see that the ribbon is not modeled in on the inside very well. The knot is a little too perfect, and I do think there was missed opportunity by not making the top removable for those DIYers that might have wanted to put a little something inside their present to elevate their photos. In general, this figure does suffer from some flashing seams. The sculpt is very average, the face is a little wonky, and because there are so many different fluffy elements, I do wish they would have used a fuzzy material, so the sculpt is going to get a 2 out of 5. For the base, I do appreciate that you don't have to use it as the figure is not affixed to it in any way, but let's be honest, you all know that I love myself an acrylic base, and Mimiyoi did not disappoint. The base color is red, and we have several different gold details. We have some lines, confetti, the name of the figure, and the version. The only disappointing part is that they couldn't replicate the heart for the 0. I personally love acrylic bases. I feel like I'm getting a little bit more for my money. It elevates the figure, feels very classy, and definitely adds something to it, so it gets a 5 out of 5. Artistry is where this figure really struggles. They decided to stray from the artwork, and in my opinion, this was not a wise decision. First off, in the artwork, they made all of her clothing look very fluffy, which they were not able to successfully recreate here. Then in the artwork, at least on the front pieces of her hair, she doesn't even have blue highlights, whereas on the figure, they definitely tried to give her blue highlights, but it is difficult to say what's on the back of her hair. One of the most egregious changes is that neither of the alternate heads gave us the face that's in the artwork, and at least one of them should have. In the figure, this face is very creepy and kind of gives me serial killer vibes, whereas in the artwork, she has a much more flustered mouth and a lot more blush. She's supposed to look embarrassed, and honestly, this would have looked much cuter. And then, of course, we move on to the breasts, which in the figure look about 20% larger and aren't even accurate. The left breast is bulging from the top and bottom due to the ribbon being in the middle, but this would only be accurate if there was a lot of tension in this ribbon, which there's not. And then, of course, it doesn't even match the artwork that does have a lot of tension in this area of the ribbon, and so it just ends up looking comically large, and I definitely feel like this was just someone's fetish. Speaking of the ribbon, there is supposed to be a twist here, and then the fingers are supposed to be modeled slightly differently with them actually pressing into the ribbon, but on the figure we can see that there is no twist, and the fingers are not very well executed in the figure. And finally, the ribbon on her right leg is flowing towards the floor, which is not recreated here. Flipping back and forth, I can at least say that the reindeer and snowmen are still very cute, and they did do a good job of shading the ribbons. The changes were made for the worse, in my opinion, and while I'm slightly tempted to give it a 1 out of 5, it does at least look like Sonico. I like the holiday concept, and they did capture most of the elements with varying degrees of success, really fumbling in only 2 categories, being the face and breast, so I am going to give it a 2 out of 5. For value, unfortunately, 23,000 yen is very average nowadays for a 1/7 scale. It is nice that we're getting a completely separate head, a removable cape, and an acrylic base. It is unfortunate, though, that it doesn't quite capture the essence of Sonico, but if you do like the concept and you're able to get her on discount on AmiAmi, I would say that you're getting a great value for your money. But taking it all into account, I would say that she's still very average at a 3 out of 5. With all of that being said, I do like the concept and find the small details very cute. With those titties, she's going to get the Jiggle Bell Award, and I would say that she could be my sleigh ride anytime, but with that face, she might just be the Santa Slayer, resulting in quite the silent night. Well, that concludes the 16th installment in our AFA series. I do hope you all enjoyed this video, so if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. I'm Kohai, see you in the next video, and happy holidays!